It is Kieran Trippier. It is delicious! Glorious! Glorious!
Walker in there too. Luke Shaw! Harry Kane wants it played into him. He chooses Grealish instead. It's Grealish! It's Kane! I think like this has happened for a long time. Here's the overhead kick from Kane! Palmer finds Watkins. Watkins turns! Watkins scores!
Hello, and welcome back to the Gate 102 podcast. I hope I find you well. Thank you for tuning in today. Really is appreciated, as always. A very special episode coming your way today, and it's one that I think you'll really enjoy. But firstly, I just want to say, if you've not yet listened to our latest episode, feel free to give that a listen. It was me talking about England's 2-1 win against Croatia in November 2018, and that's available wherever you get your podcasts. And yeah, that really was a special game at Wembley, where England came back from behind to win, meaning we topped our group of Spain and Croatia. We're through to the semi-finals of the Nations League. Yeah, such a special game. But this episode, I'm not actually going to be talking about a specific game. That's because recently I spoke with football writer and England fan James Harrison. And yeah, it was a real pleasure talking to James earlier this week. He's a fan who travels home and away, so there's a good chance some of you might know him. And yeah, we spoke about Southgate in general. We also covered 2018, some of his tactical decisions, different away games, and we also talked about the stuff he did with the FA alongside Dan Ashworth. And he also told some stories and insights that I hadn't a clue happened. So, yeah, without any further delay, I'll play the conversation I had with James, and yeah, hope you enjoy what he had to say. So it gives me great pleasure to welcome onto the Gate 102 podcast football writer and England fan James Harrison. James, how you doing, mate?
Very well, Charlie. Thank you very much for having me on your esteemed podcast.
Oh, it's great to have you on, mate. And you're actually the first live guest on this podcast. So yeah, many congratulations. So the first thing I sort of wanted to ask you was just about Southgate. The England manager is a position that divides opinion across many people all throughout the country. I obviously sort of know your views, but for people who don't know, what are your thoughts on Gareth's tenure, and both as a manager but also as a leader?
I think watching England growing up, I mean, my first tournament that I can remember was probably Euro 96. But the tournament I remember first most vividly being, game to game and waiting for the build-up was World Cup 98. So I've watched England for the best part, 30 years maybe. And the biggest bit for me of how I can compare Gareth to the other England managers is it's night and day. He's got us so close. I mean, no other England manager has actually got us to any finals at all since 1966. Furthermore, Gareth is the man that, in my opinion, has reshaped English football. When he took over, we were in the doldrums. We were in such a dark space after the nightmare of France in 2016 and Iceland and the debacle that followed there, and with Roy Hodgson's sacking. For Gareth to come in and completely reimagine the DNA of the team and take us so close, which I'll allude to a bit further. I thought he did make some questionable decisions when we got to the finishing line, but to actually instill faith, to instill pride, to instill passion, not only from the players but for the fans back into the English game, for me, I think has been an absolute revelation.
Yeah, no, you're spot on. And like I say, it wasn't just on the pitch, it was off the pitch as well. And I think and it's a question that I've been thinking about for a while, and I asked many England fans, and what do you think was his greatest achievement while in the dugout?
I think there's two big achievements that Gareth has made and been a part of. First and most foremost, if you want to talk about in the dugout, well, he gave me some of my greatest moments ever as an England fan. I mean,
Yeah.
when I was sat in Dortmund, when Ollie Watkins and I was behind the goal, I went to the games at the Euros, and to see that goal go in, I was shaking. I thought to myself, when Holland go 1-up through Zabby Simons and the pile driver into the top right corner, I thought, okay, here we go again. It's just never going to happen, is it? But, the fact that he's taken us to 2 finals, the record speaks for itself. A lot of fans and a lot of pundits and people around the world will always say, but he had a really, really, really easy run to those finals. Sweden, World Cup 98, World Cup 2018. You look at the Euros, we allegedly had an easy run there. And then again in Germany. But actually, come to think of it, in Germany, I thought it all pretty much came together for him. We had a penalty shootout victory. That's no mean feat. I think he's turned the corner in penalties. But really for me, his biggest achievement was getting to 2 finals. And my favourite moment was Ollie Watkins in Dortmund. The Cole Palmer moment was electric, but also Luke Shaw's goal against Italy. That's probably where life really peaked for me, if I'm honest, in the footballing realm.
Yeah, you mentioned obviously you've been to quite a few games, James, and I just wondered, which out of all the games you've gone to in the last 8 or 9 years, what stood out the most as, obviously I know it's hard because there's so many brilliant away days, but which ones stand out as that was epic?
Yeah, Naples would have been when Harry Kane broke the scoring record and we went 2-0 up in the away end there. I remember before I was getting into the ground, I was with one of my good friends, Kunal, who runs England Block 109. You should search them up. A lot for charitable causes. Proper bona fide England super fan. But basically, so we went there and I went to Naples and we were outside the ground and we were a little bit late getting to the stadium. I remember they held us outside and I always remember looking up into the sky and the Chelsea legend Gianluca Vialli died. I think it was a day or two beforehand and they were doing a brilliant drone show for him. So it's with regret because I would have loved to have got in and saw that. But then again, when I got in there, I felt that slight intimidation factor from those fans down in Naples. When you look across at the Curva A, when you look to the right hand side, and you can see their fans giving it to us. But when you go up in a big away game and you're massively outnumbered by many, many other fans, and it's just a brilliant feeling because it's really at home in Naples. They'd fancy that job, right? Like we would fancy beating Italy at home. But I thought that was a massive win. That was a massive win. I actually went on to the sports bar on TalkSport and I had a real debate with Jermaine Pennant. And I went on there and I spoke to Jermaine because he said Gareth Southgate was, for instance, basically saying he wasn't good enough. To which I replied, name me another England manager that's won a competitive match in Italy. And he couldn't. He couldn't.
It's so funny you say that because I listened to TalkSport quite a bit, and I remember after that game, going on and almost getting frustrated with what Jermaine was saying and a few England fans saying. So it's good that you said the truth almost, and I remember that when it was incredible. And when Kane broke the record, it was amazing.
Yeah, there was that one. I've done so many. I thought Germany away in Munich in the Nations League when we drew 1-1. That was a good game. Harry Kane penalty again. But my favourite, Euros aside, was Naples, and also Ireland away was okay, but Scotland away was absolutely terrific. It was brilliant. I remember writing a piece for 9 Football magazine, and I got a flight up there. I got an early flight from Bristol. I'd booked the day off of my normal day job. I'd booked a flight up there and it arrived at 8:00 in the morning. The ticket collection point wasn't open until late morning or early afternoon. So what I did is I decided to go up to Hampden Park, and there was an abandoned stadium up there as well called Cathkin Park. And it was there's been 3 Hampden Parks in Scottish football history. The first one was around by Queen's Park. The second one was Cathkin Park, and the third one is the current Hampden Park. Now, I took a walk, a bit of a pilgrimage, and it's an abandoned stadium. And up until the 1960s, people don't really know this, but Glasgow had 3 powerhouse clubs. They had Rangers, Celtic, and Third Lanark. And Third Lanark had gone bust. And I went to that stadium and walked around it. And now there's basically, I would say, a good amateur level of football in that stadium. But if you imagine all the terraces just covered in trees, it's now like a national park. If you imagine, but the actual pitch is still in existence. And the old footings and everything, the old terraces, the old the little stands that you lean up against, basically, were all there. So it was a wonderful pilgrimage. But the game itself, we gave them 10,000 at Wembley for our heritage game. At the time we went to Wembley, Scotland were in form. They were in big form. I think they'd won like 8 or 9 on the bounce, or they fancied it. And so they gave us around 2,500 tickets, which obviously, with a fan base such as England, I thought that was disappointing from Scotland, if I'm honest with you. I was very disappointed with it. And we got in there and you could tell the hatred was on another level. So to see us completely dismantle them systematically, mentally, physically, with skill was one of the greatest away days ever. However, having said that, the Scotland fans in and around the town centre, the city centre of Glasgow were fantastic. We were drinking side by side, and I see the England and Scotland games as like your brother. You not to say we fight Scotland fans, because we didn't, but in terms of sibling rivalry, you'll have a fight with your brother, but when it comes to the crunch, you get on with them.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's quite an interesting story, that. And yeah, it was a fantastic game when that game you're on about, when we just dismantled them, like I say, 3-1 win. Just what you want. In my last episode, I finished talking about England during 2018. Obviously an incredible year. It started with 2 good results against both the Netherlands and Italy. And obviously England went to the World Cup, and what a tournament that was. And then it got even better. England then won their group in the Nations League, beating both Spain and Croatia along the way. Just in your opinion, James, how important do you think 2018 was as a year for England? And as a fan, where does it rank in terms of best calendar years watching?
Well, it's definitely up there, isn't it? Because behaviourally, the mentality of the squad and the mentality of the fan base and the reconnection with the overall nation had improved dramatically. Just touching on that Nations League, when we went to Portugal, I was actually disappointed with Gareth Southgate. I thought he could have picked a better team. If I'm honest with you, I thought he rested a few players, especially in that semi-final against Holland. I thought he could have went for it. I didn't think that he treated it with the respect it deserves. And look, as I say, I'm a fan of Gareth Southgate. I thought he'd done great for English football, but no one is immune to criticism. And I believe that he didn't take that seriously. And I thought, for the records, and I don't think I'm the England fan or alone in thinking this, I thought we could have won that. And I thought we should have won that, to be honest. And that was a major disappointment. So the calendar year itself was fantastic. Okay, cool. We've won the Nations League group. We got to the semi-finals. We lost to Holland. Okay, cool. Semi-finals. And we got to the semi-finals of the World Cup as well. So in the history books, you could argue that technically by results, it was a great tournament. In terms of reconnecting the fan base to the squad, it was another brilliant season. It's undeniable. But to stop it from being a 10 out of 10, I would score it a 9 out of 10, simply because I thought he could have went a bit harder there personally. But then again, I'm not in the England bubble, so I don't know what's going on there. But I thought, and a lot of England fans have said through the years afterwards, that we could have had a go there personally.
Yeah. And that sort of moves me on to the next question. Obviously, you mentioned before about, me and you are both big Southgate fans, and but you mentioned about some questionable decisions. Is that maybe one of them, or any others that sort of come to mind?
Yeah. In terms of obviously questionable decisions, for me against Croatia, 2018 World Cup was a warning sign through potential tactical naivety. Obviously, Kieran Trippier scores a great free kick early in the game. At that point, we were really on top and playing well. But I thought that we panicked. I thought the management team panicked, and I thought that the players were given directions and a tactical directive to sort of soak up the pressure, defend what we had. That's Gareth Southgate, right? He's very, very pragmatical defensive manager, very difficult to break down. But the way that we were being pressed and pressured, it was inevitable that Croatia would score. Now, after the tournament, you could argue and say, inexperience. You could say it was inexperience from Southgate, from Steve Holland, and the players themselves. And you thought, okay, we'll put this right at the next Euros. Obviously, when Luke Shaw scores against Italy with that, Trippier cross and the ball hang in the air, I described that in my book, which we'll get to later. But as the ball hangs in the air, he sort of cocks his left foot back like a coil, and the powerful spring of that coil unleashes a brilliant drive past, obviously, Donnarumma. And England off the post and in, we go 1-up. I nearly had a heart attack, I think, through excitement. I think it was unbelievable. But then the same pattern happened again. And that was the first moment in my mind where I had a bit of a trigger point. I thought, okay, maybe we haven't learned here, because again, we were going backwards and backwards and backwards and backwards. And then inevitably, Italy score. And from that moment, from there, we were hanging on really until extra time, where we started to have a go again. But I thought that those two tactical decisions were very, very questionable. Now, look, we're in a World Cup semi-final and a World Cup final. You're going to have moments where you need to soak up pressure. But if you put a caveat on that, the England team at that time was full of players that have won things. If you look at Marcus Rashford, you look at Jordan Henderson at Liverpool, for instance, you've got Harry Kane hadn't won anything, but he's a highly experienced player. I would have expected us at home at Wembley, 1-0 up, to carry on having a go. But again, beggars can't be choosers, can they? You can't really say, look, Gareth, you've got this wrong, you're a disgrace, when in reality, no other England manager, apart from Terry Venables in 96, had even come close to getting us to the promised land. So it's tinged with a bit of tactical negativity, which, I don't know, it's like an itch in the back of the brain that you can never sort of it's really annoying. And obviously, as we go to Qatar, I thought we played well, and I thought he actually learned in Qatar. I thought we were unlucky against France. It's all shoulda, coulda, woulda. If Kane's penalty goes in, if Pickford manages to get a hand to that Giroud bullet of a header. But, France, I think, along with England, Argentina, probably got some of the best squads in international football. So I thought he learned his lesson there. But obviously we'll talk about Germany, no doubt, where I think is some of those little gremlins starting to rear their heads again, really.
Yeah. And you mentioned Qatar, and I always think that out of all the tournament exits we've had, I think that one hurts the most, because we played so well, and like you say, if Kane scores his pen, and if like I say, you could be looking at a foul for the first goal that we conceded. Just loads of if buts and maybes, really. And obviously people, and I think you mentioned the Italy game. I think that's when I suppose some people started to doubt Southgate. I think after that game, even though, like I said, he'd done a brilliant job in getting to the final, I think it was after that game where people almost started to turn. And this is just out of curiosity, do you ever think he was used as almost like a scapegoat at times? Last on the job.
Yeah, I do. I do. I think it's in, very unpopular opinion here, but I think it's potentially the mentality of some fans of England. If we don't win it, who's to blame? You look at the three boys that missed the penalties: Rashford, Sancho, and Saka. The abuse and the hate that they got online was completely and utterly unacceptable. Let's have it right. Yeah. Jordan Henderson missed a penalty against Colombia in World Cup 2018. And actually, we went on to win that shootout. But I always wondered to myself, if we'd have lost that shootout, would he have got that hate? I don't know. But
that's a good point.
But as far as I'm concerned, I thought that Southgate, some fans did, but again, the vast majority of fans would have been proud at our, the fact that we got to the final. Again, if you catch me on a bad mood, or if I was in a terrible mood or in a difficult place in life, you might say to him, well, he just doesn't learn his lessons, does he? He keeps going backwards and backwards and backwards and backwards. But the fact that he corrected that in Qatar meant to me that I thought, okay, he is trying to learn. He might not have the tactical nous of Mourinho. He might not have the verve and the deep-rooted AI-like intelligence of a Pep Guardiola. But what he does have is really pragmatical defensive capabilities. And I think that in defense, he's brilliant. And in Qatar, he started to really take the shackles off of the team a little bit. That's what we were really begging for, I think. And it was a chance for us to take the shackles off, let Saka run, let Rashford run. You've brought in Jude Bellingham by this point as well, who obviously had his breakout in the rout against Iran. So I thought that he learned in Qatar. Absolutely. Was he a scapegoat for Euro 2020? Yeah, but look, if we would have lost 3-2 in the final and played fantastic and just not had the rub of the green, he still would have been a scapegoat. I think in some people's eyes, they need someone to blame. They need someone to vent their anger at. And it was the three boys in Southgate that got that in 2020, wrongly so.
Yeah, and I suppose it's like I say, when things don't go your way, it's almost as if a lot of people have to blame someone. Someone has to be responsible, and you just can't admit that we did everything we could. And I suppose you mentioned the penalty shootout. Obviously, England won the latest one against Switzerland. I take it you're at that game, James, weren't you?
Yeah, I was right behind the goal. Yeah, absolutely. I can the way that we're talking about Southgate today, and we talk about penalties. For those that haven't listened to it yet, at work I like to listen to audiobooks. Okay, there's one that was a very famous play which came out not long ago called Dear England, and it tells the story of how the FA really, from around 2008, said, okay, that's enough. As soon as the players left the pitch at Wembley, late 2007, I believe, against Croatia, when we had lost 3-2 at home. Steve McLaren, the Wally and the Brolly, worst England manager, in my opinion, of all time, including Sam Allardyce. I think that from that moment, the FA made a real decision, a step change, almost akin like to Germany after England won their 5-1 in 2001 to what culminated in their World Cup victory in 2014. They changed the way the German FA thought about football. They thought about grassroots. They thought about the DNA. So in terms of England, under Greg Dyke, I believe, who came in, it was Dan Ashworth and Gareth Southgate. And Southgate, before he was England under-21 manager, was actually part of the technical development team at the FA with Dan Ashworth. And they set out some, clear directives for England called, obviously, the England DNA, which was unbelievable. And just going back to it, in Dear England, it documents everything about that. And a real interesting story was before England, after Southgate had took over as England manager in 2016 on an interim basis, we played Scotland away. We went 1-0 up, and then I think it was Lee Griffiths scored 2 free kicks for Scotland right at the end of the game, and then Harry Kane scored in the last minute. And what happened was, before that game, Gareth Southgate got the squad together at St. George's Park, and they said, right, we're going on a trip. And the players were like, okay, well, where are we going? But what's going on here? And they took them to the Royal Marines. And they took them to the Royal Marines in secret, away from the prying eyes of the media. They didn't even tell the clubs. They went there, so they ran the risk of injury. But what it did was actually bring them together as a team. He created a team ethos and a team ethic. Eating in the canteens, for instance, under the Capello years, where there was no ketchup, most famously so, but obviously the players were sitting at different tables. Man United on a Man United table, Liverpool on a Liverpool table. Southgate said, that's enough. That is absolutely enough. We're all together here. So obviously, going back to 2008-9, Dan Ashworth come in and he proposed a report called the DNA England Report, or the England DNA Report. And basically it means how England should play. And some of the directives that he had was for England to intelligently dominate possession. That was one of the DNA reporting factors. To regain possession intelligently, and to sense changing moments in the game. Now, you could really argue that the latter point there, Southgate, I thought, I don't think he maxed out his potential as a manager on that last point. But when you're looking at regaining possession intelligently, yeah, I can see that with the Southgate tenure especially. And intelligently dominate possession, absolutely. I thought that the England teams of the past in 2008 would get the ball, you'd look up the right wing and you ping it forward. It's old school English football, 4-4-2, maybe 4-4-3, maybe 4-3-3. But what Southgate and Dan Ashworth did with this DNA was to obviously intelligently dominate the possession. And what they did is they looked at Spain as a case study. Now, here's another interesting side story and a side fact for your listeners, which they may find it very interesting. I've detailed in the Dear England play and book. What England used to do is you would have the England under 16s. I believe you would have maybe the under 17s, 19s, and 21s. And what they would do was they would go off and they would play their tournaments, and that's fine. But what England didn't have was, for instance, even younger youth levels. You would have like maybe the England schoolboys. And I remember the England schoolboys would have been played on Sky Sports, and you would have Northern Ireland, Wales, Scotland, England, and sometimes Ireland, I believe, as well. And they would play on Sky Sports. And these guys would be 14, 15, 16 years old. And they would only play against each other. And they would always have, you could obviously, they would be playing on TV. So television exposure technically would be good. Absolutely. But when we're looking on a competitive and progressive level, they're playing the same nations. They're playing the same sort of players that they would come up against week in, week out in those youth leagues in England. They be the players they play against. So what Dan Ashworth proposed was very clever. He stopped it. He pulled England out of it, much to the dismay. Obviously, Sky Sports were obviously sponsoring this thing. They were showing it. Obviously, Northern Ireland and the home nations were absolutely aggrieved to say, well, what are you doing? England are leaving this. But Dan Ashworth said no. What he did is he took us to the youth tournaments. I forgot the name of it now, but the youth tournaments around the world. So we went from playing Northern Ireland, at St. George's Park, for instance, or wherever they played them. We were now playing Spain, Argentina, Chile, France. We were playing Brazil. We were playing Mexico. And we were playing all these other nations around the world at this youth age. And the first product, the very, very, very first product, I think when we brought in the under 12s and 13s as well, there was one for each age group. There was a team for each age group, rather than if you're 13 years old and you're fantastic, you'll be straight into the under 15s. No, you'll play with other people your age. And the first one that came through, the first golden nugget and the first player that came through, Jude Bellingham. So when you really look at it, it was good that it's no coincidence that England started to peak around, they started to, let's say, come out of that shell and finally join the upper echelons of the gods of football with France, Argentina, Spain, where England are now seen as a damn good team, and we go to the tournaments expecting to really challenge, not just to go there and think, okay, well, if we get to the quarterfinals, you never know, we might get a bit further than that. We're a bona fide, genuine, world-class powerhouse at every age group. And the fact that Dan Ashworth had a lot to play with that is not to be underestimated. And Gareth Southgate, as the technical director, then he moved obviously to the youth and then to the under 21s. They went on a journey with these players straight through. It's actually interesting that Dan Ashworth just very recently, obviously at the time of recording last week, he's now gone back to the FA, which for me is massive news for England fans. And I think, again, it just highlights the FA's commitment to really ensure that England are not just there to, make up the numbers. The guys, the board members at the FA are no longer 70, 80-year-old men that are stuck in a time warp. These guys are now pragmatic, data analytical driven professionals with the mental aspects as well. So you have mental people, psychology people in the camps, and to really think about psychology. Another little story, when we got to the 2018 World Cup, what Gareth Southgate did was he took a nugget of information about each England player and put on a piece of paper in their bedrooms next to their bed on the bedside table a bit of information about them, which was a real personalised and classy touch, including the staff, to make them all feel as one. So, you imagine you're a young, I don't know, let's say, for instance, Jordan Henderson, 2018 World Cup. He's gone there, he's gone to his bedside table, for instance, and he's looked at a message, hi, Jordan, I know X and X and X, really let's have a good tournament. You're going to think to yourself, he's really taken the time here. He's not just left us in our rooms to play PlayStation. There was real community feels within the halls, for instance, and the scouting, the scouting was so intense. There's a story that I believe his name is Stuart Gray, and another England manager as well, were out scouting England's potential opponents. So it was either Colombia or somebody else, I can't make it out. And the two England scouts were literally sat in an airport in Volgograd, waiting to see who went through. So then obviously whoever went through they hop straight on a flight straight to England's base to brief Gareth Southgate and the rest of the England team about that opponent. And it's just that level of detail where I think in the past, the scouting was very limited in terms of statistical analysis. And now they're turning up with a full report on these teams. So you look at the Liverpool data analytical team, for instance, I think England is right up there. In terms of penalties, you mentioned, the way that we approach penalties now is completely different. So the psychology is before, when you analysed all the England penalties, the whistle would go, the player would immediately run up and smash the ball. Now what happens is, and you'd have to read the book to get a better analysis, but obviously as we're on the pod, I need to summarize it quickly. When you watch the England penalties back, when your listeners finish listening to this podcast, or yourself, as soon as the recording's finished, just put the England penalties against Switzerland and the England penalties against Colombia too, and the same thing happens where they take a penalty and you wait for a minimum of 3 seconds. They wait 3 seconds. Inhale, exhale, set yourself, run up, bang. And you will see straight away that the difference is astounding. And that's just all through Dan Ashworth and the technical team in 2008 saying enough is enough. This is what we're going to do. In terms of the penalty man, he was the man that was responsible for Chelsea's penalties in Russia. Now, they lost to Man United in that match because Terry slipped. If he doesn't slip, we sent Van der Sar the wrong way, they win. Again, the Brentford set piece coach, was is probably one of the industry leaders, along with the Villa and Arsenal set piece coach. He was of England too. And it was just that level, really, with Dan Ashworth heading it, that, a lot of England fans talk about, Dan Ashworth, oh yeah, he was at Brighton, West Brom, Man United, Newcastle. He doesn't really do much, does he? He really does. He really...
Absolutely. I think we talk about Southgate's legacy, and his legacy is so much more than just 8 years as manager. Like I say, he's been in the under-21s, the FA before that. And I think something that people try and dismiss is the fact that all these great players have come at once, and that Southgate's just been lucky. The fact that, Bellingham, Foden, Kane have all come at once. But like I say, it goes to show Southgate's been a big part in their development as both a player and a person. I even think back to Bukayo Saka. He played him as a left wing back, and that really helped his development. And examples like this, goes to show that Gareth did so much for these players. And I think, obviously, at the time of this recording, obviously Tuchel's in charge, and whatever happens to England over the next few years, I think will be down to Gareth Southgate, a large part of that.
Well, in English, I think he put the building blocks and the foundations in place for us to go forward. I thought in Germany, I thought he regressed a little bit. If I'm honest, I think some of the tactical decisions were baffling. I really did. I thought he overstayed maybe one tournament too many. I thought he should have went after Qatar because, that Slovakia game, if Jude Bellingham doesn't do Jude Bellingham things, we're staring down the barrel of another Iceland result. I don't want to put a negative spin on it, but no, for me, Gareth Southgate, that was brilliant. And the planning started with Dan Ashworth back in 2008. That was a culmination. And what they've done is laid the foundations, not paper thin foundations. I'm talking pure stainless steel, like deep into the bedrock of the footballing universe. England are here to stay. And mark my words, we'll win something in the next 10 years.
Let's hope so. It would be nice, wouldn't it, after so long. The last thing I want to ask you, James, obviously you're an England fan, you go home and away. I believe you're currently writing a book called Follow England Away. Do you want to tell me a bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I've been writing it now for nearly 18 months, and I'm only just over halfway through, but now I'm accelerating, shall we say, writing it. And for context, when England go away from home, there's the famous chant that we sing, which is follow England away, follow England away, follow England away. I thought, okay, going away from home, I've had many experiences following England, like just crazy things that happen to you. At the Euros, for instance, we get to our hotel, it's closed, it's gone bust, no one told us. It's just crazy stories from England fans, from the Russia incident in 2016 to a guy on a sleeper train for World Cup 2018 who then met those hooligans. And then there's another guy, for instance, who cycled from Portsmouth down to Russia. You know, there's stories from all over. A guy in Slovakia, everything. So it's real England fan testimonies from real scenarios with real people, with real world consequences. Some humorous, some not so humorous and very serious in nature. But it's a real must read for all England fans. For instance, as I say, I got to Germany. I booked a Flixbus. We were supposed to go from Holland across the border into Germany. I'd booked the wrong bus on the wrong day. So there were 6 blokes trying to get to Germany. That wasn't easy. And then we managed to blag a coach across the border. We got to Dusseldorf. As I say, we had a long day traveling. We then get to the hotel. It's gone bust. Another part of that story is we then get the train down to Frankfurt to watch the game against Denmark. And then on the way back, we got on the train that took us 200 miles in the wrong direction. So, there's so many humorous things in the book. And it's a real eye-opener for the average Joe who doesn't understand that England fans are not the yobs of yesteryear that was alleged. The reality is now you find that the modern day England fan is very knowledgeable and very streetwise, and also in love with the football of our country, but also well behaved.
Yeah, well, I'll definitely make sure to have a read of it when it comes out, and I'm looking forward to reading it. James, just want to say a massive thank you really for coming on. It's been great to get some insight, and you've said stuff that I didn't know myself, and I'm sure my listeners would have learned a lot, especially with the Dan Ashworth stuff as well. So really appreciate you coming on, mate. And thank you.
No problem. Thank you very much for having me.
My many thanks go to James there. I really appreciate him giving up his time and coming on. And I hope you enjoyed it. And like I said before, such great insight and into the Southgate era, stuff that I did not know, especially with the things he did with Dan Ashworth and the youth system, and the whole England DNA project. Great insight. And he also mentioned his book that he's currently writing called Follow England Away. Like I said, look forward to when that's out. And can't wait to read that. Sounds so interesting. Obviously, this episode was slightly longer. Well, a lot longer than usual. But I think it was definitely worth it. My next episode is back to the normal structure. And I'll be talking about England's 5-0 win over the Czech Republic at Wembley in March 2019. And this was actually a European qualifier. The first European qualifier I'll be talking about on this pod. So that's come next week. But until then, take care of yourselves. Once again, thanks for listening. And I'll see you soon.